Mechanical design and electrical design on Autodesk's Fusion Platform. What's the implications? Let's talk about that next. Okay, so what exactly are we talking about here? What's the big deal? So a few years ago, Autodesk acquired a solution, an ECAD solution named Eagle. And that solution, the application, desktop application, lets you design and develop circuit boards. So being able to define the logic of the board, being able to lay out components on the board, being able to route traces through the board, and then managing a library of approved components that electrical engineers can use to populate those boards. So that is a standalone software application that has been available for a while. Autodesk has continued to make it available as a standalone product. But what they have been doing is they've been integrating that into the Fusion platform. So if you're not familiar with the Fusion platform, this is the cloud-based offering that you use through a browser to do mechanical design. There's PDM capabilities, there's PLM capabilities. It is expanding over time, specifically for design and manufacturing. So they have now made Eagle, well, they're calling it Fusion Electrical, or ECAD. They have made that available on the cloud now as part of Fusion. So that in and of itself has some interesting advantages to it, especially with collaboration. You can invite other people to collaborate simultaneously on the same board, maybe focus on different sections of the board. There's good opportunities to have multiple people working at the same time on the same board, especially as boards get more complex, especially as you get into more multi-board systems and rigid flex systems. That's an interesting aspect of this. Another interesting aspect of this is having a library that is managed in the cloud. So traditionally what happens is there is a library file that is distributed to all of the electrical engineers when they're designing boards. And that library file tells them what components are approved that they can use, and it gives all sorts of metadata about that component, which is all very important as you're placing components on a board and as you're selecting different components. With it being in the cloud, it's very interesting because you can make changes to that library fairly quickly, whereas before you'd have to make changes to this library file and redistribute it. And if not everybody was working off the same library file, then you might have issues with people using the wrong components, especially stuff that has been sunsetted that no one should use anymore, maybe can't even be purchased. So that's an interesting part of it too. Everybody will always be working against the same library. That's an interesting aspect of this as well. The most interesting aspect to me, however, is the integration between mechanical CAD and electrical CAD. So a lot of times the electrical engineer and the electronics engineer is developing the circuit board, and that has to fit into an enclosure of some type that will then go into a product. And you'll have lots of these black boxes throughout your product or system, and you got to make sure that a couple things jive between those two things. The outline of the board has to fit to the outline of the enclosure, especially for mounting points. Also, the height that you have, your clearance that you have for components is very important. And you get into lots of other really important stuff like heat management for circuit boards. Manufacturers and electronics engineers are having to put in stronger and stronger processors, which generate more heat, which leads to more and more issues about how you're going to evacuate that heat out of the enclosure, right? So making sure that the electronics engineer and the mechanical engineer designing the enclosure are on the same page is really important. Now, in the past, these two roles would use two separate applications. One is a mechanical CAD application, the other one is an electrical CAD application. And they would synchronize by exchanging files. They would export the definition of one, import it over here, export it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that works. At a technical level, that works. Actually, some of the data exchange formats have gotten pretty advanced and pretty progressive, and that's good. However, it is an explicit effort to share changes from the electronics engineer to the mechanical engineer. And it also can be difficult to understand what changes were made between different versions. Okay, so what this has led to, a lot of times, what I've seen in my experience, is the electronics engineer and the mechanical engineer will synchronize right before design release. And they will make sure that there are no issues. And if there are issues, that becomes a problem because you're late in the design cycle. You are already committed to fulfilling a lot of requirements using certain components on the board outline. It can be difficult to then come up with a solution, a compromise between these two design domains. The nice thing about Fusion having both capabilities in the same platform is that changes are propagated automatically. Frankly, it's a lot like associativity that we see between mechanical components, the 3D model, and drawings. You just update back and forth. And there's no explicit effort to do that. It just happens, right? So the next time you open up the board, you're looking at the enclosure. Oh, wow, okay, I can see that there's an interference now. Okay, I either need to change the enclosure or I need to talk to the electronics engineer. Maybe we need to look at a different component. So this fosters collaboration earlier in the design cycle so you can resolve those issues earlier in the design cycle. And that is the single biggest advantage that I see of these two kind of capabilities coming up into the same platform. So that's it. Those are the implications of mechanical CAD or mechanical design and electronic design going into the same platform, saving changes back and forth, and enabling earlier collaboration. That's it. Take care and talk soon.